One of the things I want to tell you is that you're not a failure. Okay? You feel like, so one of the traps that you can get caught in is, okay, I saw this cool video about breathing, and it can open up your mind, and it can give you near-death type experiences and all this other kind of stuff. And that's all well and good, and I'm not saying that it doesn't do that, but it keeps you kind of stuck, that sort of thing, looking for the next shiny object. Okay, what can I do to become more enlightened and more spiritually aware? So don't dismiss anything out of hand either. Put it on the shelf, and eventually you might get some information that makes it make sense, and you can pull it off the shelf and go, oh, okay, now I understand what they mean there. Or eventually, yeah, you might discard it and go, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. So those are words to live by. Hello, my friends. How are we doing today? I want to talk about some things that are going on. Well, and they have been going on for a long time, especially on the internet, social media, YouTube, Facebook, X, all that kind of stuff, having to do with the Great Awakening, or the spiritual awakening, if you will, which many of us see is happening and going on these days with people. And there's a lot of people talking about this kind of stuff on the internet. And one of the things that I want to talk about is the gurus and the ascended masters and the influencers, so to speak. Now, how do you know somebody is an ascended master? We hear a lot about ascended masters, angels, the angelic realm, and so on. Now, I have nothing against that sort of thing, and I believe that there is some truth to some of that kind of thing, but I want to make a point here about giving your devotion or your power to some internet guru who gives spiritual advice. And some of that advice may be sound. There's a couple things going on here, and I want to give some tips on how to discern and not give away your power to spiritual gurus, influencers, and authorities, okay? And so let me say right off the bat that you are the operant power in your life. You're the one in charge, friends. Nobody else is. Now, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you can't have teachers and you can't learn. That's how we all learn. We all learn from reading and from teachers and other people. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't give away your power to that person. Don't trust them implicitly. Trust but verify, as they say. If something resonates with you, that's fine. That's usually ringing the bell of truth for you. But sometimes it's heightened emotion also. So how in the heck do you discern what that is if you become overly devoted to some guru or some internet influencer? Okay, a couple of tips here. First of all, let's talk about ascended masters. An ascended master will never proclaim themselves as an ascended master in a past life or what have you. They won't. Think about it. It doesn't make any sense. Why? Because that's an appeal to authority to get you to listen to what they have to say. A real ascended master is not going to appeal to authority. They're going to speak the truth, give advice, and let the chips fall where they may. Because they know that the person is either ready to hear it or not. Because the person is on their own journey. They are the operant power in their life. Okay? Ascended masters know this. So going around the internet and claiming that you're some ascended master or some spiritually enlightened being or guru, this even goes into the star seed thing. Now, don't get me wrong and don't get upset with me. I'm not saying that there aren't star seeds or anything like that. I'm just saying claiming that is an appeal to authority to get people to listen, okay? And it's unearned authority. Authority has to be earned, okay, by action. There's a scripture that says, by their fruits you shall know them. That's a profound truth. Instead of listening to what they say, look at what they do. And that actually goes for anybody in life that you are giving some devotion to. And again, like I said, we all need teachers and we all need reading and books. There's people out there that say, "Oh, I don't read any books. I didn't learn this from any books." That's nonsense. Reading books or listening to somebody or having a teacher is what inspired them to seek spiritual enlightenment, if you will, or that sort of thing, and brought them to where they are. They might have reached a point where they don't need any books anymore, but everybody had to learn from somewhere. And we all start off at the same level when we're born into this life as far as this physical realm goes. We have to learn to walk and talk and navigate the pitfalls and the and the joys of the physical realm. Okay, it's that simple. So, and they had teachers, and sometimes they were good teachers, and sometimes they weren't. Or they were good in some areas and not so good in other areas, and so on. This is just, I call it common sense, but we've heard we hear that all the time now. Common sense isn't so common anymore. But it's just reasoning things out, if you will. So that's one key. Somebody claims they're an enlightened being or an ascended master or this or that. That's a red flag for me right off the bat. That doesn't mean they might not have some truth to share, some advice to share that's good, that makes sense, that that resonates with truth because it's a truth. Because truth is truth. It doesn't matter who speaks it. There's an old religious leader who once said, "Well, I don't care where the truth comes from. If the devil has any truth, I want that too." So some of you might recognize that, and you'll know who that person was. But I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to bias anybody if I can help it. So, but we all have our own biases. So be careful who you give your devotion to or your power to. In fact, you shouldn't give your devotion to anybody, but you should discern and learn. You can learn from anybody and learn from them, but don't, because they opened your eyes to some profound truth doesn't mean that you should be devoted to them. The days, in the past, that may have been a thing. There's still people out there saying you need a guru, especially if you're into the Eastern philosophies, and enlightenment. And I take that as you need a teacher. You need teachers to get where you want to go. Okay. But the old model of being devoted to that teacher and as that person is your spiritual guide or enlightenment or whatever, a guide would be okay, but learn, but move forward, make up your own mind and question everything. You've heard me say that before if you listen to this channel. Question everything. Don't take anything at face value. A good friend of mine, J.J. Dewey, likes to say, run it by your soul. And he's also where I got the term unearned authority. Authority has to be earned. And that goes for the physical realm too. There's people, like in the political realm, people look to all these so-called leaders as authorities on this and that. We just had a crisis a few years ago where people were appealing to authorities, and it turns out that they were lying or they didn't know any better. And so people do that. People do that with doctors, with the law, with taxes. If you have a problem with the law, you go to a lawyer, right? Because they're the authorities. Okay. Now, in some cases, that's true. I mean, they know more about the administrative law system than most average person, and the average person doesn't want to spend their time researching and figuring all that kind of stuff out. And so there is a time when you want to appeal to authority. But how do you know that authority knows what they're talking about? Well, that's where you get second opinions on things, like especially medical. Then you should get a second opinion because, there's various opinions on things. This goes for spirituality too. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that, but you might want to get a second opinion on stuff. And we tend to look for, I don't know, I call it spiritual laziness, and I'm not free of it completely either. We tend to look for somebody else to figure it out for us, That's the easy way, right? And so I have said in the past that, or I heard it somewhere and repeated it, that often the way to find the correct path is it's usually the hardest one. So not always, but quite often it's the hardest route to go. And we tend to look for the easy way, the comfortable way. And look where it's led us, especially with politics. you know. People don't get involved in politics, and I don't like to get involved in politics. I did for a time for many years, but I have to pull back because there's so much negativity and there's so much deception and posturing and lies and so on and so forth. It's just exhausting. People just want to live their lives, and enjoy their lives and raise their families and so on. And people are like that all across the world in general. It's usually people who have ambitions and agendas that cause most of the problems, right? So, kind of switching gears a little bit here, I have been going through a period where I'm sort of reevaluating. I have been on this spiritual journey for near 30 years or more, probably more. It seems like that. But, and from time to time, I have periodically reevaluated, tried to drop the excess baggage and move forward. And I've been in a period of reevaluation. And at that time, you kind of lose motivation and you don't, but you start questioning everything that you have believed was true or what have you, which is a good thing. Question everything. And I kind of use the analogy of you're carrying a bunch of bags, right? And so you set down all the bags and then you only pick up the ones that you need and move on and leave the rest. That can be scary for people. I did that with religion, and I've done that several times since. And so I began to recognize it now in my life, and I've been in a period of that for a while now and reevaluating. And that's what made me think, and I see all this stuff on the internet and on YouTube and so on, and all this advice, and I was like, yeah, okay, I already know that, or I've been there, done that, so on and so forth. And then I kind of evaluate, well, what kind of impact has it had in my life? What good does it do, as they say? And I think that there's periods in your life where that's important. So like when I was in my 50s, that was a very intense time of spiritual progress, awakening, if you will. I don't know. I don't believe in the all of a sudden you wake up type of thing. It's an ongoing process. I mean, there are points where it seems like all of a sudden you woke up because you start seeing all these new possibilities and so on. But awakening is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. We're here awakening, trying to remember who we are and where we came from and so on. And we're experiencing the opposites of that so that we can appreciate who and what we are, in my opinion. And so one of the things I want to tell you is that you're not a failure, okay? You feel like, so one of the traps that you can get caught in is, okay, I saw this cool video about breathing and it can open up your mind and it can give you near-death type experiences and all this other kind of stuff. And that's all well and good. And I'm not saying that it doesn't do that, but it keeps you kind of stuck, that sort of thing, looking for the next shiny object. Okay, what can I do to become more enlightened and more spiritually aware and so on and so forth? And there are some things that you can do, but for the most part, at least in my experience, you just have to let it unfold, and it will unfold when you're ready. And so that makes me, like some people, like I've always been really interested in out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. And I have done courses and different things to learn how to go out of body. Okay. And I haven't been very successful at it. I've been able to do it one time that I can really discern. And other times when I probably did, but I wasn't sure. And some people say, well, if you weren't sure, then you really didn't. But I think your brain kind of calculates that in a manner that it thinks you can understand. So like as a dream or a lucid dream or what have you. But that's just my opinion. But anyways, a lot of us anyways, are always looking to do something to make things happen on the spiritual side of things. And oftentimes that's actually detrimental. You're trying too hard to make it happen, whereas you just need to let it flow. Keep that as a point of attention that you want to do that in the back of your mind, but then let it go. And then I have found that oftentimes things will unfold on their own when you're ready. And some of it has to do with letting go of some of the things of the physical realm and so on, right? And I'm sure many of you can relate to this type of thing. And so some of you might not relate to it because, like, when I was in my 50s, if I heard somebody saying some of this kind of stuff, I might have said, "Oh, no, no, I'm going to do this and that, and yeah, I'm going to get there," and so on and so forth. That really is it's part of the physical realm to want to do that because that's how we get things done, at least culturally, is okay, I'm going to do this, and so I need to take this action, this action, this action, and this action, okay, to get it done. And that's not really how it works. If you believe that we create our reality, and if you've ever listened to Neville Goddard, the universe gives you what you focus your attention on, so to speak, or God, if you will. That's what prayer was designed to do, is to focus your attention, I believe. So, and that's what all of these actual rituals from all the spiritual and traditions, everything from Buddhism to Hinduism and so on and so forth. And another thing, and all of those traditions are designed to focus your attention in a certain direction, which I call the spiritual, and you might call it the quantum or what have you. And where attention goes, energy flows. And so eventually you'll see the fruits of that. But if you try too hard, you're constantly seeing yourself not accomplishing what it is you want to accomplish by taking, action one, action two, action three, and so on. And that kind of keeps you in a suspended loop of not having what you want. And that's really manifestation 101. So I'm looking more at manifesting spiritual experiences. This is where psychedelics and things come in. People want to shortcut it, so to speak. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If you feel prompted to do that, that's fine. Just do your research and so on and so forth. But ancient tribes and peoples use those also to loosen up the physical realm's hold on your mind and allow you to see the other side, so to speak, or to be more aware of it, however that works out. And it's different for everybody. So again, where attention goes, energy flows. Put your attention on something, but don't overdo it. Or put your attention on it temporarily as a desire and then let it go. That's what Neville Goddard teaches. And he's also where I got the operant power thing, that you're in charge. And that's the important thing to remember, that you're in charge of your life and everything about it. And now the spiritual traditions, the religious things that people grew up with, and I came through religion through a very authoritative form of Christianity. Some of you have heard me say it, Mormonism, before. Those things are, if you look at them as focusing your attention, they can be helpful. They helped me. They put me on the path to knowledge about these things because I was interested in. I was always trying to do something to become more spiritually enlightened or to have a spiritual experience. Okay. And most of the time it didn't work, but sometimes it did. And I learned that I had a gift for healing through that discipline. So that was a good thing. So that's the other thing too, is to look for the good in all things. And that's something you hear me say often. And the other thing too that I wanted to talk about is, speaking of religion and other disciplines, is people are saying, "Oh, don't stay away from this one, this discipline or this religion or that religion, because that's of the devil," if you will. That's a religious aspect, but or that's not the right way, or you're doing it wrong, and so on and so forth. Again, that comes back to, okay, you're doing something, you're taking some action to try and get a spiritual experience or to step up your spiritual enlightenment, so to speak. And in my opinion, that's not how it works. You'll get it when you're ready. And so the question to be asking is, okay, so if I haven't got it, why am I not ready? And so if you put your attention there, and contemplate that periodically, things will come to your mind through intuition and through your higher self that will give you some insight on as to what you're holding on to that may be blocking some of that stuff. That's been my experience. Okay. Yet I still find myself falling back into okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this breathing technique. And there's nothing wrong. Breathing techniques are fantastic. They've been very beneficial for me in many things, including helping me in some spiritual progress. But I find myself very unmotivated anymore to try any of that kind of stuff. I'll see a video or something and go, "Oh yeah, I want to try that," and I'll try it a little bit. But I'm very much unmotivated to continue with it for very long, usually. And you could just say, well, you're lazy, you're getting older, that kind of thing. And that might be part of it. However, I think it's my higher self telling me you don't need that. You just need to let it let it flow and let go of the blocks that may be holding you back in those areas. And so here I am talking about that intellectually, and I know this, and I've actually known this for years. Yet I find myself sometimes going, gee, what's going on? Why haven't I moved forward here? And what does that tell you? That tells you that that's where my attention is, on the fact that I haven't moved forward. And so that's where the energy's flowing, keeping me from moving forward, if that makes any sense. That's a very tricky little spiritual trap, so to speak, for lack of a better way to put it. Those are some things to think about, my friends. But again, be careful who you give your power to. In fact, don't give your power away to anybody. Be yourself, question everything, even somebody you respect as a teacher, a spiritual teacher. That's fine. Give them the respect that they deserve, that they've earned, by teaching you something that then you've tried it yourself or tested it out yourself spiritually, however that may be, and it rang the bell of truth with you and so on. That's fine. Give them your respect for teaching you that, but don't give away your power to them and that often what happens is people will give away their power. That, oh, this person taught me this spiritual truth, so now I'm going to follow them exclusively and not question anything else they say. Question everybody. And that's a lot of religion is built that way. Don't question, the hierarchy or the leadership or because if you do, you're questioning God or you're questioning the scriptures and so on. Question the scriptures, my friends. There's a lot of truth in the scriptures, but I see them as a metaphor, not literally. Not that there isn't some literal stuff, historical stuff that happened, that's documented in there, but it's put forth as a lesson, as a teaching tool, as an analogy or a metaphor. And that's the important part of those, in my opinion. And I think people who are down on them because they were treated poorly by Christians or just have some bias because they either were raised that way or picked it up somewhere or whatever, I think they're missing out on a lot of spiritual truths that can be discerned through seeing the scriptures as a metaphor, including the Hindu scriptures, the Buddhist scriptures, and so on. In fact, I think it's an inherent trait in humanity that, and I joke around that you could take a technical manual and find metaphors for spiritual principles in it. And it's true. I have found that. And you can see it in movies, in books that you read that aren't focused there, that don't have anything. Once you see things that way, you start seeing the metaphor in almost everything. And it's a fascinating thing. You start learning, everything is here to teach you. And there's a scripture that says all things work for your good. And that's one of them. The whole universe was designed to work for our good, to teach us who and what we are and appreciate it fully. And you've heard my metaphor for that, for sitting in the nice warm house next to the fire with a loved one. And you can't appreciate that fully unless you've been out in the cold before. So I think those are important things to think about, my friends, and to remember, and to look at everything with a discerning eye and skepticism, healthy skepticism. That's something what's his name? He wrote My Big Toe. Tom Campbell says, open-minded skepticism. Good to be skeptical, but be open-minded. You might learn something. Don't just dismiss it because it doesn't fit with your worldview or paradigm, if you will. Okay, that's another thing that I've learned over the years is I don't dismiss anything out of hand, no matter how crazy or wild it sounds, because I might get some information or some experience later on that confirms it to me or makes it make sense. So one of the first tests of truth and discernment is, does it make sense? All truth is logical. You'll hear people say, no, it's beyond logic. Nope, there's nothing beyond logic. It's just that we don't understand the logic. Okay, so if there's a higher power or or a higher intelligence that created the universe, so to speak, or is the universe, so to speak, then everything has a logical conclusion. It's just our limited understanding makes it seem illogical to us in many cases. So don't dismiss anything out of hand either. Put it on the shelf, and eventually you might get some information that makes it make sense, and you can pull it off the shelf and go, oh, okay, now I understand what they mean there. Or eventually, yeah, you might discard it and go, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. So those are words to live by, my friends. Words to live by. The other thing is, what would love do? And how we treat others. With all the turmoil going on right now, and that's what's happening. People are waking up to a lot of things, and they're waking up to this unearned authority that's been ruling our lives for centuries, and people deferring to it. And a lot of people defer to it unknowingly. It's part of our culture. It's how we're raised. It's part of all the cultures, whether they're religious or not. You always defer to the authority, and you never question the authority, and so on and so forth. That's pure bullscat, as they say. Always question authority, especially somebody who asserts that they have some authority or that they were some authority in a past life or what have you. Always question that. Always. And never take anything at face value. Run it by your soul. Run it by your intuition. And give it time. Don't jump to conclusions. All right, my friends, I'm going to leave it at that. And I hope you're having a great day, evening, afternoon, wherever you may be. Peace out, my friends.